I was actually doing a lot of thinking yesterday in preparation for today's video. And considering how great these last 5 months have been, I would feel it's about time to say this. Today, my grandfather would have been 89 years old today. Now, normally, for those of you who don't already know, he passed away on January 21st, 2020, right before the pandemic started. So, I can tell you that 2020 was already a bad year before, the world flipped upside down. Now, obviously, I and many other people in my family would take the time to think over and reminisce, and be glad that my grandfather, Bobo, as we call him, his name was Richard Rahill, but we all called him Bobo, that he was a part of our lives. And today was obviously, and yesterday was obviously and today is obviously no exception. Because today, September 27th, would be his actual birthday. As I just said, he would have been 89 years old today. But I mentioned how great these last 5 months have been. So much of that he would have loved, considering in some way, shape, or form, if he were still alive, I wholeheartedly believe with all my heart he would have been involved in. Even to some capacity. I mean, first, around May 5th, that was when the Corning Museum of Glass and United Way gave him a Lifetime Achievement Award for all that he did for United Way. I remember it was myself, my brother, my sister-in-law, my uncle, and my grandfather's friend. And we all went to the Corning Museum of Glass, saw some great people, had a delicious meal, wonderful time, and we were celebrating all the work for United Way that my grandfather did. And it was special. I mean, frankly, it was at that moment where I realized that, look, I have no doubt that by the time I go, someone's going to think I'm great. But I got a long way to go before I could say I'm just as great as he was. And then, barely even a week later, we celebrated my youngest cousin's graduation from college. She graduated from Connecticut College. And it was 10 years and 4 days ago, at that point, where my grandfather and everyone else in my family, including my youngest cousin, who again was graduating, last May, they were there for my graduation from Gettysburg College. 10 years and 4, graduated from Gettysburg College on May 17th, I believe. Yeah, the 17th, May 17th, 2013, that's when I graduated from college. And everybody was there for me. 10 years and 4 days later, we celebrated my youngest cousin's graduation. And the difference, of course, was my grandfather wasn't there. But he would have loved how we all got together for it. He would have loved how we all got together for my other cousin's wedding last November, for that matter. And he would have loved how we all got together later in the month of May for my grandmother's passing. My grandmother on my mother's side, Diane Glissman. We call her Nana. Now, in case anyone is actually wondering, yes, that Nana was actually Bobo's first wife. I mean, I could go into the nitty-gritty of how they were no longer together, but I'm sure some of you guys are gonna figure it out right away. So I'm not gonna. Sure, I'd rather not tarnish what I'm trying to do here. I'll let you guys figure it out. And it was so funny how we'd only just gotten together for celebrating my cousin's graduation from Connecticut College, only to not even a month had passed, and we all got together again for Nana's funeral in Las Vegas. And I mean, I don't know if my grandfather would have been at that funeral. Maybe he would have. But regardless, he would have loved how we all got together for it. And then came what happened during the summer. It took a long time, a lot longer than it should have. But I went back to two of his old haunts. First, I went to the Valley Inn, or the Guy Noga, as you would call it. And I had the very wings that back in 2011, he boldly proclaimed to me that the wings at the Valley Inn were just as good, if not better, than the wings at Elbow Room here in Elmira. And if you guys know me, you know I love Elbow Room's wings. I think Elbow Room's got the best wings in the area. Although, I definitely am really digging the wings from Nick's Pub and Grill and Horseheads too. And no, I'm not saying that because that place has the same name as I do. I'm trying to add some levity to this otherwise very, very somber video. More importantly though, even more important than how good the wings were, was back in 2011, when my grandfather first took me there. I was on spring break at that point. It was actually the first time I'd ever been up to Keuka Lake in the month of March. My grandfather and I went to the Valley Inn, and I met arguably the nicest waitress ever. Like, ever. And I had gone to the Valley Inn with my grandfather and other members of my family in the coming years after that. But it was Father's Day weekend of 2017. That was the last time I'd ever gone, with or without him. Actually, I was with him every time we went. So, yeah, Father's Day weekend 2017. That was the last time we ever went to the Valley Inn. Or any of us went to the Valley Inn for that matter. I know that I've been saying that this year has been a good year for me. And that's largely because I was just saying, forget it. I'll do it myself. And going to the Valley Inn was pretty much no exception. The only way any of us are going to go back to the Valley Inn is if someone just said, you know, F it. We're going. Or I'm going. And that's pretty much what I did. And not only were the wings as good as I remember, but that waitress still remembered who I was. I hadn't been in the Valley Inn in 6 years. She still remembered who I was. That's worth more than anything to me. So needless to say, my grandfather would have loved that. And speaking of what he loved, he also loved going to the lakeside, which I also went back to. and I had both the pig wings and the crooked blue wings. Now, I've talked about these wings a lot already, but for those who don't already know, the pig wings and the crooked blue wings were served when we had all gotten together for my grandfather's 80th birthday. This would have been 2014 when this happened. Again, he would have been 89. So yeah, it would have been 24. So it was 2014. And my brother and his then girlfriend, fiance, loved those wings so much that they had those wings served at their wedding. And in case anyone's wondering, yes, those wings are definitely good enough to be served at a wedding. I can attest to that. And then came the passing of a man known as Freeman Smith. My grandfather lived on Cuca Lake for the rest of his life, pretty much, after he retired. He lived up there year-round. And he knew everyone and everything going on up in Hammondsport, New York. And Freeman Smith was one of his best friends. Needless to say that when Freeman Smith had passed away, when they had his celebration of life, someone from my family had to go. I mean, obviously, if my grandfather was still alive, of course he would have went, but that wasn't the case. That's why I had to go. Again, someone from my family had to. And I'll never forget how, during that celebration of life, anyone who talked to me, and I told them who I was and how I knew Freeman Smith, I mentioned that Dick Rahill was my grandfather. Well, again, Richard Rahill, but everyone called him Dick, which I'm not entirely convinced he liked, by the way. So, you know what, to keep this, I do want to keep some seriousness here, so for the sake of doing so, I'll refer to him as a Richard. I told him that Richard Rahill was my grandfather, and everyone knew him. Everyone knew how great he was. And to which I say, how could they not? I'll never forget, at that celebration of life, a couple of us got together, and one guy took out his wallet. And here's the thing, my grandfather's cocktail of choice were Manhattans. And he always actually had a set schedule with drinking them. So this one guy takes out his watch, looks at the watch. He said he'd be on his second Manhattan right now. I can't make that up. Because that is actually what my grandfather would have done. I mean, I never really did pay attention to when he'd be drinking Manhattans and what time they'd be at. But I got nothing else to go on, so I've got no choice to believe that. I'll never forget all the love and support he gave me throughout my life, which actually does remind me. About a week after his 80th birthday, the birthday I mentioned where we had the wings from Lakeside for the first time, that was the first time I ran the Wine Glass Marathon. And at several points throughout that race, he actually went to cheer me on. Meaning he drove all the way from where he lived in Hammondsport, all the way down, first to Savona to see me run there, then to Painted Post to see me run there, and he was waiting at the finish line for me. And naturally, as my mom would have wanted me to do, I wrote him a thank you note, a kindly word thank you note, thanking him for being there for me and all the love and support he's given me throughout my life. He then, and before I continue, I was still living with my mom and my dad at that point. I guess it's 2014, this is years ago. He left a message on the phone later, thanking me for, sending that thank you note. But the one thing about that message I'll never forget was when he said, I hope to be there all the days of your life. He was in my life for 10,981 days. I was 30 years old when he passed. 30 years old, 3 weeks, and 3 days. That's how old I was when he passed. Unfortunately, though, there's a reason why I remember that number to such detail. It's not necessarily a pleasant one. As some of you guys probably already know, back in 2018, I really needed help. A lot of help. The kind of help where I may not be here today if I never got it. The kind of help where, to this day, I forever will hate my mom and my dad for it. And how everyone in my family knew, too. It was on my 30th birthday where my grandfather, and keep in mind, my grandfather was suffering from cancer, like throat cancer. Like, he already lost his voice, pretty much. And he could barely do anything. But he calls me on my 30th birthday to tell me that he was disappointed in me. That was one of the very last things he ever said to me. And he did it on my 30th birthday. You know, considering everything that's happening in my life at that point, and trust me, I'll be talking about that a lot in December. To make it to 30, to make it to 30 at all is already a huge milestone. But it's a special one. Because, like, hundreds of years ago, it was a godsend for you to be able to live to 30. Like, it was nothing short of a miracle if you lived to 30. And, you know, nowadays, thanks to medical technology, you can live a lot longer than that. But he called and told me he was disappointed in me because of everything involving me getting help and what happened before, during, and after. Although I think for him the final straw was he and I actually went out to dinner together a couple weeks before to a place called Three Birds. And I ordered I believe it was an on-the-bone ribeye. Or maybe it was the no, it was a T-bone or a porterhouse, I believe. And before I continue, what I'm about to say is perfectly fine to do, by the way. I was picking up the bone and eating the residual meat that was on the bone, and he didn't like that. Again, what I just did was perfectly okay to do. But lots of people say it's okay to do. He didn't like it, though. Now, I'm sure he was probably on some really powerful medication, so maybe he wasn't in the right frame of mind when he said he was disappointed in me on my 30th birthday. But considering that he was about to die, and considering that this could be one of the last things he ever said to me, probably not a good thing he did that. Because now, unfortunately, I'm going to forever remember that. Oh, don't get me wrong. I'll remember all the love and support he gave me throughout my life. No question. And obviously, all the love and support he gave me in life overshadows him saying he was disappointed in me. But it's not by much. Certainly not enough for me to forget it. That's for sure. And believe me, I wanted to say something back. I really did. but I didn't. Partly because the man was about to die. If anything, what I said probably could have made that happen sooner. But we'll never know. I bit my tongue. I didn't say anything. And then 3 weeks and 3 days later, on January 21st, 2020, he passed due to complications of cancer. It's impossible for me to say what life would be like if he was still here. It's even more impossible for me to predict what his overall opinion of the entirety of the pandemic was. But if there's one thing there are two things that, well, actually, no, three things. Three things that he instilled in my life that I'll never forget. One, well, the first is pretty obvious, and a lot of other people instilled this in me as well. But my grandfather especially, is that I believe in God. I believe in God. I believe that he moves in mysterious ways. And while I don't fully believe that he, puts every little thing in life in front of us, again, he moves in mysterious ways. So, whether God meant for him to be gone now, I don't know. Much in the same way that the more I think about it, the more I wish he was there for when I got my heart broken. I don't know what he would have done, but it would have been, I'm sure it would have been amazing. And I'm sure I would have thanked him for it. Life may still go on, but there's something that's truly always going to be missing with him not here. But his presence will forever be remembered and known. Not just from me, but from everyone else he knew. In fact, I mentioned the belief in God. My aunt my aunt out in Colorado, my godmother, actually does a low and high act of kindness. Sound familiar? So, I'm sure you guys are wondering if I even have one, and I do. My low is the fact I obviously miss my grandfather. My high is I'll forever remember all the good he did for me and for everyone else in my family. All the love, support, the kindness, instilling the belief in God. He instilled the belief that family should be there for each other no matter what, which is another thing he instilled. And the third is that life does go on. And if I had an act of kindness, I would say that, I did all I could to be there for my mom yesterday, because yesterday was when my mom finally got back from her trip to Las Vegas. And I was there with her a lot. Oh, trust me, I guarantee when I see my mom later today, she's going to be a little down. In fact, the fact that it's like a gray, overcast sky, pretty fitting for today, I suppose. But, again, the good Lord moves in mysterious ways. So, maybe it's for a reason. I mentioned earlier how he was there in my life for 10,981 days. Trust me, I believe a day is going to come when I will have lived longer without him than with him. But I'm never going to forget him. He was my grandfather. He was Bobo. I don't know if, these videos will never go up to heaven at all, or if he can even hear me at all, or whatever. But more often than not, people always ask the question, if there's anyone who passed away that you could spend any time with, who would it be? The answer couldn't be more obvious, nor could I say it fast enough. It'd be Bobo. I would tell him that I love him, and I would let him know that while life has been hard, far from perfect, I would tell him that I'm doing okay. And if he actually is looking down from heaven, I'm sure he would say, I know, because he'd be seeing it all. He'd be seeing this. I love you, Bobo. Happy birthday.